A group of landlords in Seattle, Washington is fighting to have their case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court against the City of Seattle's eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today. Once again, it's covering the whole story about the eviction moratoriums. The reason I keep bringing this up is I do not want to see these things happening again in the future, okay? My personal belief is that they are unconstitutional and they're just wrong, okay? It's wrong that these governments came in there and they dictated how landlords could operate their businesses, forcing many of them out of business and into bankruptcy or financial ruin, okay? That is not right. The government doesn't have the right to do that according to the Constitution. They actually have an amendment to the Constitution that says that the government, right, cannot take private property for public use without just compensation. And yet that's exactly what they did with these eviction moratoriums. And so I am so opposed to this, and I want to see the Supreme Court basically strike down every single future eviction moratorium from happening. And I want them to open up for liability all of the previous eviction moratoriums so that landlords can sue these governments and these government officials that put them into place, okay? Basically, this is the time that this is what we need to happen. This is what we need to happen. Otherwise, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. These far left-leaning progressives, they think that everything is legal, and they don't think there's going to ever be any way that we'll be able to stop it. Well, you know what? Yeah, we're going to stop it. We're going to put an end to it. Anyone with common sense, I mean, think about this for a second. You're telling people to house people for free, that they have to do it. They cannot evict them if they don't pay. I mean, what kind of logic is that? There is no logic on this earth where that makes sense. Like, okay, so I have to, imagine somebody just walks out. Okay, I'm living here in your house now, in your spare bedroom. Okay, I don't want to house you. I don't want to house you here in my house. Well, I'm going to live here anyway, and I'm not going to pay you anything. Well, that's what they're doing to landlords, okay? They're basically telling you, you have to house these people, they don't have to pay you anything, and you just have to deal with it. You just have to suck it up and take it. And they did that for years. In some places, the eviction moratoriums lasted over 3 years, okay? 3 years. And some of those landlords, they didn't get rental assistance. They didn't get any sort of compensation. They just had to eat those losses. That's why this is an unconstitutional taking. Yet, the reason why these landlords, this landlord group up that is fighting against the Seattle's eviction moratorium, the reason why they're going to the Supreme Court is because the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is probably the most left-leaning court of appeals in the entire country, they didn't see it as an unlawful taking. I don't even know how that is possible, okay? I mean, other than they have their blinders on to reality, because you know what? I guarantee that if any one of these justices in this appeal court, these judges in the Circuit Court of Appeals, if they had a tenant and they had to pay their, for this tenant to live in their property, they'd be like, no, I should be able to get rid of this tenant who's not paying me. Anyone who has a tenant would think that, right? No. According to the government, you can't do that, According to these people, they think that, well, you know what? You have to be the welfare provider. You have to be the public housing provider for all these people who aren't paying rent. And that's just wrong. It's just dead wrong. We need to nip this thing in the bud. The Supreme Court needs to throw out all these eviction moratoriums and then return us to normality. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Do you actually believe that the Supreme Court is going to hear this case? Because remember, they get a lot of cases that they possibly could hear, and a lot of them they just don't hear it. I'm afraid that it will never be heard by the Supreme Court. I mean, even though this is important because it's about property rights. It affects every single person in the entire country. But I'm afraid that, it won't be heard. Oh, man, anyway. let's get into this article. It's quite interesting. It's coming from the Cato Institute, and so I know a lot of people have heard of the Cato Institute, more right-leaning publication. But anyway, let's get into it. Like I said, the article is called "When Property Owners Lose the Right to Exclude, the Whole Economy Suffers." Yeah, let's see what the Cato Institute says of this whole situation. In March 2020, the city of Seattle imposed the first in a series of emergency orders responding to the threat of COVID-19. The orders prohibited landlords from evicting tenants for non-payment, expired leases, or any other reason, unless the tenant presented an imminent threat to the health or safety of neighbors, the landlord, or the tenant's or landlord's household members. Under the 5th and 14th Amendment, states cannot take private property for public use without providing just compensation. A group of rental property owners in Seattle sued the city, arguing that the moratoriums amounted to uncompensated takings. Each of the owners rented out property covered by the moratoriums, and each lost the right to control their property as a result of the orders. And that's what I'm really talking about here. That's what they don't mention. Okay, they're like, every time you read about an eviction moratorium, they're like, well, we want to make sure that the people, they don't end up on the streets because, at first it was about because we're afraid of the illness spreading. Then it became, we're afraid of the economic hardship that these people are facing, right? But whatever the story was, it changed multiple times throughout all of this, right? It changed multiple times the reasoning behind these eviction moratoriums, but they never mentioned that the property owners would lose the right to control their property, okay? They lose the right to control their own property, and now that right is placed into the hands of the government and of the tenant. And see, that is a huge, huge issue. That's the whole reason they wrote the Constitution was because, hey, you know what? The governments of Britain and they would come in, they would search your place without reason, they would confiscate your guns, they would take your property without any reason. They wrote these rules into the Constitution for a reason. Okay, they wrote these amendments to the Constitution for a reason, because they said, we do not want the government to have that much power over us, where they can just do this willy-nilly whenever they decide, whenever some sickness or flu comes through, or whenever global warming comes through, they're just going to be, hey, we're taking your property away, or hey, you have to, you lose the right to free speech, or whatever, it's garbage. Those are our supposedly unquestionable rights, and that's why the Supreme Court needs to hear this case. But the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit rejected the owner's takings clause based on its interpretation of the Supreme Court case Yee versus the City of Escondido. According to the Ninth Circuit, Yee held that the government can change the terms and duration of a tenant's lease without compensating a landlord, so long as the landlord originally opened the property to the tenant voluntarily, right? And so, the justification that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals used was this case, Yee versus the City of Escondido, right? And I believe that was a rent control case. And simply put, right, that case, the reason why that case isn't applicable in the eviction moratorium, they're going to go over here in the article. So let me continue. Now the owners are asking the Supreme Court to take their case, and Cato has filed an amicus brief supporting their petition. In our brief, we explained that the Ninth Circuit completely misinterpreted Yee, which merely stated that an ordinance setting a maximum rent did not amount to a physical taking. The owners in Yee were not trying to evict any of their tenants. And unlike Seattle's orders, the ordinance at issue in Yee allowed the owners to evict tenants for many reasons, including non-payment of rent, violation of the law, expiration of the lease, or an owner's wish to change the use of the property. So the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals used a case completely unrelated to being unable to evict a tenant to justify that landlords wouldn't be able to evict. I mean, give me a break, okay? Simply put, the case that they used as their justification was, I mean, it's unrelated. It's unrelated. So if the case had said, okay, well, in this case, if the person is under rent control, they can never be evicted, well, maybe I would agree. But no, it's not the same thing. And so they're pushing this forward to the Supreme Court. I really want the Supreme Court to hear this, because it's garbage. It's absolute garbage that nobody has called this thing out for what it is, and it's unconstitutional. Nobody has called this stuff out for what it is. Why? Why is this like, here we are 4 years after the whole pandemic thing began, and nobody has successfully gotten a case. This is one of these cases up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is still allowing these things to happen. What is going on in this country? This is insane, okay? We are going to see more of these eviction moratoriums. We're going to see more of these unlawful takings taking place because they didn't act. Okay, all they got to do is act. They should pull this up. Like I said, this is important for every single person in the entire country, not just the property owners, but the people who rent. It's important to them as well. This is important to everyone. This is so important, and going into the future, we are going to be screwed. But I know, like, there's political reasons why these sort of cases, they just don't ever get up to there, because I feel like the Supreme Court justices are like, listen, we don't want the fault, we don't want to be the pressure from the public. We don't want that pressure. Like after they made that decision on Roe versus Wade, they got a lot of pressure, a lot of negative attention because of that, and they don't want even more negative attention, death threats, etc. Listen, sometimes you got to make the hard decisions. You got to make the hard decisions for the greater good. And when we're talking about our property rights here, just imagine people no longer having motivation to rent properties out because they can be taken by the government and forced into basically indentured servitude and forced to provide a service to people for free. I mean, nobody's going to want to be a landlord at that point, okay? Nobody. Anyway, we'll see where this whole thing ends up. I know people are going to be expecting that maybe the Supreme Court will hear it, but my guess is that they're weak, that they're cowards, and that they're not going to hear a case this important.